Alright, so here we are again with the old F100, and I promise this is the last video and I'm pulling the 289. So today I want to go through the various ways to check for spark. You know, maybe you have a no start condition or you're having ignition issues. So I'm going to go through some of the ways that you can diagnose and test your ignition and kind of some of the things to look for. So some things you would need is a multimeter, obviously, a spark plug socket so you can pull a spark plug if need be. You always want to have your brain and maybe an internet connection so you could watch this video again if when we get into the finer points if you don't remember what exactly I said. So obviously you don't need too many items here and you can get going. So the first thing you want to check if you have a no start condition where your engine cranks but doesn't fire off, you want to make sure that you have good battery voltage here. Now that sounds counterintuitive. If the engine will crank over but not start, you'd think, well, the battery's good. Sometimes with these more hopped up electronic ignitions, what you can have happen is when you crank the car over, the voltage will drop to such a low amount that the electronic ignition will not be getting enough voltage to send proper spark to the engine, and thus it won't start. So that's the first thing. You just want to look over and make sure you're good. And even though this truck has sat here for so long and has all this janky wiring I did in high school, it still must not have any battery draws. After a couple months we still got good enough voltage. Alright, before I get too ahead of myself, I want to take time to mention the most classic way of checking for spark, and generally the first step of when you notice you have an issue or you question your ignition. So what you want to do is remove a spark plug, and then you want to take that spark plug wire that was on that spark plug from the cylinder, stick it back on there, and stick the spark plug somewhere on your engine, preferably on a really good ground. It's surprising how little of a ground you can actually set it on and it'll still work, but you want to find the best piece of unpainted steel that you can possible. So oftentimes exhaust headers work well if they're not rusted out farm stuff like these. But anyway, then what you're going to do is crank the engine over, and if you see a spark jumping across here, you know you have ignition. Now keep in mind you want to look for a purple flame, so to speak, like it looks almost purple or blue when it's jumping across. If you see something yellow or like a dim orange, you know you have weak ignition. This could also be your issue, and we'll get to checking that stuff out in a little bit. But oftentimes this is hard to do when you're by yourself. When I did have that 302 powered RX-7, I did it in a way where I took my plug wire and I put it up on the cowl where I could actually, I think I stuck it in the windshield wiper and grounded it with a wire, so where I could actually see it from the cab when I turn the engine over. But anyway, we'll go on to the ignition, and I'm checking out some other stuff if you do have ignition issues. Alright, so the next thing we're going to check out is to see if we're getting power to the coil. So now the next thing we're going to take a look at here, if you do notice a no spark condition, is we want to check and see if we're getting our 12 volt power to our ignition coil. And sometimes if you have a bad ignition switch, you know, this can kill this off and you won't be getting your voltage to your coil, and obviously not to the rest of your ignition system. So I guess let's work through that. Alright, climbing in the old F100 here. Well, my blue lights still work from way back when I was in high school. So anyway, the first step we're going to do here is take our key and we're going to turn our ignition on. So now we should be getting 12 volts to our coil, and we can check it. Alright, now with the key on we can test our ignition switch. So we're going to need our multimeter again, and kind of how I have it set up is you want to use a ground different than the negative that's on your ignition coil, and we'll get into a little bit of that in a bit. But then our positive is obviously on our positive terminal on our coil, so it should show the voltage that's coming into the coil itself, and we see about roughly the same voltage that we have on our battery. So in this case we're good, we're getting power to our coil, and we can move on from there. Now if we had a no spark condition where we didn't see anything on the plug but we have voltage up to this point, then we can go ahead and determine that somewhere between the coil and the distributor we're having an issue. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and test the coil. So I forgot to mention you need a little bit of wire here. So you want to take your piece of wire, strip it back, and kind of hook it to the negative side of your ignition coil, and then leave the other side stripped and bare. You need your ignition on for this. So basically what we're about to do is we're going to mimic what the points do or what your ignition module, as I have here in this old F100 does. So anyway, we're going to interrupt the circuit on the coil, and basically that's what your points do. You know, it interrupts the ground and it'll discharge out your terminal on your coil. And we did this on our old F100 video, and I went into much more in-depth explanation, but since we don't have a points ignition in front of us, I'll save that and I'll link the video below. But anyway, again, I got it hooked to the negative, and what we're going to do is we're just going to find a good ground, and with our ignition on, see, we're getting spark, and our spark plug, which I forgot to mention here, is hooked to just straight on into our coil. So if our coil's good, when I scrape this across here, across our ground, we should see our spark plug light off every once in a while. It's kind of difficult to do. Maybe you've seen it there a few times, but it's not like going to be any significant spark. You can see it sparking there, but it's enough to know that your coil is getting power. So to see that again, we're running across the body, and so that way we can verify that our coil is good. So again, if you're working through a no start issue, your engine cranks over, doesn't fire at all or in the slightest, and then you can't see anything on the plug, and you've checked your ignition switch, you're getting voltage to your coil, you perform this test, you know your coil's good, then you have to move to your distributor. Alright, so taking a closer look at our distributor here, there's not a whole lot going on. You know, your ignition module or your points in your condenser and your cap and rotor is really all that's left. Taking a closer look, the first thing you want to do is just a visual inspection of your cap and rotor. If you have a lot of corrosion, like on your cap contacts or inside of your distributor here, I have a little bit of corrosion, but all in all it's not really all that bad, nothing that would stop it from running. Another thing to look for is like significant moisture buildup within your distributor cap. This will also cause issues and cause it to not run. You know, it might light here and there, but that would be heavy moisture. So if your cap's dry, there's not significant corrosion, and if there is, you can take off something small like a knife or something and scrape those off. So we see there's a little corrosion on these, but anything that's heavy or significant, and you'll know when you see it, is enough to cause issues. But finally, really, if you have points and condenser, it'll be the same way, all corroded up on the piece that interrupts that ground mechanically. And again, I'm linking the video of our F100 after we pulled it out of the woods for 20 years, and we did this, and we had to replace our points. They were all corroded out. But anyway, if you have an ignition module like I do here, this is the Pertronix Igniter 3 unit. All these modules are going to have a resistance that you can check, or if it's like a digital 6AL MSD, it's going to have that magnetic pickup within it, and you can check the resistance on all those with your multimeter by setting it to ohms and checking it as directed on either websites. There's different things that they look for, so you'll have to get more in depth there. But all in all, that's kind of how you cook through an ignition system and check for spark. If you go through these things, it's very easy to narrow down what your issue is and get you back on the road that much faster. So with that, I guess we're gonna finally yank the 289 out of here. So I think I'm all done making videos, and we'll just have to see what happens.